Brill. So yeah, I'll just introduce a little bit about me and Indigo. So I actually started, I'm actually head of comms and marketing at a theatre in London, the Arcola, which is in East London. But I started volunteering with Indigo when I was furloughed. So that's how all of this kind of came about. And I'm actually going to be working full time with Indigo in a couple of weeks' time. So all has worked out very nicely with that, which is good. So Indigo are, we're a small cultural consultancy led by Katie Rains, who's the co-founder. She kind of led this project and the two of us worked on it together. And the other pieces of work that we generally do are working with arts and cultural organisations across the country and other countries on marketing and fundraising. So the way this all came about was back in April. I think we basically identified that organizations they were so kind of bogged down in the detail of everything that needed to happen, like all the kind of cancelling shows and furloughing staff, sorting everything out, that no one had a moment to kind of look up and think, oh, what are audiences feeling at the moment? What are they going to need from us in the next few months? So everyone was kind of desperately starting to get things online or thinking about that, but no one was really sure sort of what the audiences were feeling. So our aim was to provide organizations with this insight just kind of as quickly and simply as possible. So what we did was come up with this survey, tested it out with a few different organizations, and then opened it up wider. So we provided organizations who signed up with a link to send out to a segment of their audience and a link that they could view their results as they came in real time. So it was there was no kind of delay between sending it and getting the results. They just had them instantly. And then we combined the results to build up a national picture, so organizations could see how they compared. And they could also, it meant we could widen it out to organizations who couldn't take part, so they could also benefit from that research. And really, we were amazed by how the survey took off. We offered it totally free, which was kind of part of the whole point of it. Which was just that anyone could kind of take it up and get involved. And we ended up having 140,000 responses from over 300 organisations across England, Scotland, and Wales. And that all took place in kind of April and May. And we then realized that having run that for about 6 weeks, we needed to know more things and different things from the audience. And it became clear that getting back into venues wasn't going to be happening for a little while. So we needed to ask stuff about experiencing culture in different formats, in sort of outdoors and digitally were the main things we looked at. And that was when we launched Act 2, which is what I'm going to be taking you through some headlines from today. So we had 250 organisations taking part in Act 2 and 100,000 responses. And one of the things that I'm going to talk a little bit about as well, which I think is kind of relevant to what you're all thinking about today, is the sort of power of this collective data set. So what having such a vast number of responses has enabled us to do was cut the data in loads and loads of different ways. So we've been able to produce smaller reports looking at things like specifically family audiences. We were commissioned by Creative Scotland to do a piece of work looking at just the Scottish organisations, things about kind of rural versus urban organisations. And we've also looked at results solely from Cornwall, so they had a kind of slightly different picture as well. And we'd love to do more of this kind of thing as well. We have also been able to supply the research into DCMS to help lobby government for things, and it's been amazing to see how organisations have kind of used it to inform their business planning and generally guide communications for reopening. Enough waffle, let's get to the data. So this all took place in June and July, and obviously this was before really before any venues had reopened. But I think the data is still really valuable and relevant at this stage where, only I think it's 22% of venues have been able to reopen so far. Obviously we're in a very changing situation, but this gives a kind of snapshot of that time. We had 258 participating organisations and 103,000 audience responses. And the organisations that took part were a whole mixture. They were theatres, art centres, producing and touring companies, universities, local authority, and the audience responses were generally from frequent attenders, so over 90% of them had attended live events 2 or more times a year. We asked questions in these 6 areas, so that's what I'm going to be taking you through. So yeah, the first group of questions was about which audience members were kind of still booking now for events that were still going on sale. This dropped and dropped over the weeks as fewer and fewer events kind of stayed on sale. But what we saw was that less than 1 in 5 people were actively booking at that time. And interestingly, about a quarter of those people said that they thought the event they were booking for would be postponed. So they were basically kind of putting in some money into investing some money into an organization they cared about, even though they thought the event would probably be postponed. There was an interesting difference in this data with the family bookers, who a much lower percentage thought that their event would be postponed, and they were much more likely to have booked for family shows in theatres in November and December. So you can kind of guess what that was. So that was quite an interesting thing to pull out, that communications around cancellations with family audiences were going to be very key and different as well. So we then asked them to say, if they had to say now when they'd be ready to start booking again, when would they choose? And yeah, over 2/3 said they wouldn't even think about booking for about 3 months. What was interesting about this figure was that it seemed to stay pretty steady as the time went on. So we ran the whole surveys for, I think, about 4 months, and that 3-month period stayed quite consistent. So it was this sort of period that was like in quite a long time sort of thing. So it was sort of worrying to see that not come down. It just sort of rolled on. However, what we did ask was how, yeah, when we kind of started to bring the concept of kind of social distancing measures and all of those kind of things, 2/3 of them said that they would consider coming to cultural venues if they were confident that the required social distancing and hygiene measures were in place. So I think those 2 figures are quite interesting to view together, thinking about how we're kind of communicating with audiences about the measures we've put in place and how important that kind of side of things is, that there is actually a big chunk of willing audience out there. They just kind of, they need to know from the venues what's in place. And this was really supported in the comments as well. We saw that people were kind of prepared to take the risk for the right show. They wanted to support and get back to live events, and basically just, yeah, it was, the arts were really, really important to them, and they were ready to go back. The one that I enjoyed the most was this comment saying that the sooner we can get back to normality, the better, even if that means wearing as much PPE as the event stipulates. The sort of idea that that's the new normal, is being in full PPE to watch theatre. But there we go. So we asked then which particular measures would make them more or less likely to consider attending. So this was really about testing the audience, kind of how far things would tip into not being an enjoyable experience anymore, basically. So, you know, if you're in full PPE, spaced out from your household, all of that kind of thing, do you still want to come and see live theatre? And not very many, as I said, yeah, not really many venues at all were open when we did this. A few bits of kind of outdoor stuff was taking place. And one of the quite interesting things that has changed during the weeks of the survey was the bit about masks. And actually at this time, masks really weren't a kind of normal thing that people were used to wearing, and people saw having to wear them in auditoriums as a bit of a detractor. But in subsequent surveys we've done since then, we've seen that has totally changed. So that's quite an interesting thing to see the public get used to the measures that come in, and I'm sure that that will happen as well with any other measures that put in. People are just getting used to them. We also saw some interesting differences for family audiences. So toilets were a much bigger issue for family audiences, as you could probably imagine, and they weren't so keen on things like on-site health monitoring or anything that could be kind of a bit invasive for younger audiences. Families were also very concerned in the comments about the sort of pressure on them to enforce social distancing. So a lot of parents were commenting saying, you know, it's hard enough getting them to stay sitting in their seats. We're not going to be able to get kids to stay 2 meters away from other households, those kind of things. And the pressure of that on families without kind of appropriate support from venues felt like too much of a thing for family audiences. We also had a look at disabled audience members specifically, and the things that they were particularly keen to see were the accessible toilets being still kind of available for disabled audience members, and that seating for disabled audience members were included within any new plans. So we then asked about experience and culture in different formats, with digital being the first one that we offered. 62% of people had experienced culture online during the recent lockdown, and about 80% of those people had watched a full-length production. So clearly that is the kind of success of the NT live streamings and similar things like that. We looked at we gave them kind of lots of other options as well, and we saw that 25% had taken part in a creative activity, so something a little bit more interactive, and that went up to, I think it was 54% for family audiences, and we saw that 1 in 3 people had made a donation. We then went on to ask if they were unable to go to cultural events in a venue for the foreseeable, would they be interested in engaging with cultural events online instead? And the majority said that they would be interested in doing this, 82%. Around half said they would pay for it, and 2/3 would pay if it was something new. So those were the kind of headline things, was basically, if you're creating new content to be consumed online, there's a much better chance that audiences will pay for it. If it's reruns of old shows that were filmed, you know, not particularly in a way to be experienced online, then you're much less likely to get money for those. We've actually worked with the audience agency and Baker Richards on 2 reports looking a bit more closely into this digital stuff. I'll post the links to those in the chat after this, but the audience agency just looked a little bit more about the kind of different audience groups in that, and they saw that overall the kind of conclusions were that online content was generally expected to be enjoyable and different, but inferior to live events. And as I said, that digital first content was the kind of most interesting thing to audiences. The Baker Richards report then looked into more about what different forms of it people are going to be willing to pay for. And there was a kind of slight split here in art form, with more kind of willingness to pay for high art, so opera, ballet and drama, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'll post the links to those so you can delve a bit deeper if you'd like to. And it was really in the comments that we got to see how divided the opinions on the digital stuff was. There was amazing feedback from people who were able to access performances where they hadn't been able to before, and generally the overall feeling was very positive. But I think there was kind of a general sense as well that there's nothing like live performance. That kind of thing came up again and again, and people just saying, you know, they're tired of screen time, they just want to get back into a venue. And I think trying to see culture as online stuff as a replacement for live was not something that audiences were interested in. It was kind of a bit of a stopgap, really. We then went on to ask about outdoor culture, and overwhelmingly people said that they would really be interested in experiencing culture outdoors if they weren't able to come back to a venue. For the very small, the 6% who said that they wouldn't be interested in it, it was the unpredictable weather and standing for long periods of time that was holding them back. Interestingly, family audiences were even more positive, so I think it was 96% of family audiences were up for it. And they were interested in a whole wide range of things as well. We got lots of great comments about this, people being really excited by the idea and keen to explore. It is worth remembering that these surveys took place in June and July when we had a lovely balmy summer, but I think there have been a lot of successful events going into the autumn as well that can kind of give us confidence that people are still going to be up for getting out of the house and going to see these things. What was quite interesting from this survey, and I think probably because we were surveying sort of more generally traditional venue goers, more than 80% of them basically wanted outdoor versions of what they see in a venue. So it's like theatre, concerts and gigs, rather than going to carnivals or festivals or more participatory outdoor arts. So that was quite interesting in sort of getting audiences to, especially as we go into colder months, think about the idea that an outdoor arts experience can be something different. It can involve, walking through a light show or those kind of things. There are other options than just kind of sitting outside, but as you would in a venue. There was also much more of an appetite to pay what they usually would pay to go to a venue compared to digital. So more than 70% kind of said they'd pay just the same as usual to go outdoors. We did some further research on outdoor arts with the group Outdoor Arts UK. So that was very interesting because that was a little bit later on in the year, and we saw ideas coming out from that about people being very keen on hyper-local outdoor events, so things that tour to your street or your doorstep sort of thing. But there were still a group of people who were willing to travel for things which were safe and could be viewed from further away. So the idea of drive-in performances came up quite a lot, or stuff where people were distanced and they could view an event from further away. So the last little bit was we asked about the financial survival of the organisations that had sent them the survey, and we saw here a kind of huge outpouring of love in the comments for all the organisations who had sent it, and people showing huge concern about culture generally, which I think shows a good level of commitment and advocacy if we ask our audiences for their comments and that kind of thing. We also saw that actually the majority of people will be able to spend kind of as much, if not a little bit more, than they did before on culture when it's able to happen again as normal. We asked them to kind of rate that along a scale. So although there are groups and family audiences were one of them who've seen their income reduced as a result of COVID, most people seem to say they'd be able to spend as much, if not more. So overall, just to kind of sum up what our audience is telling us. So I think from Act 2, the things that we learned were there was a big chunk of the audience who were very cautious about returning to live events, but that with the right kind of reassurances and measures in place, they were likely to return. They were really concerned about the organisations they love. They wanted to support them in a safe way as soon as they could. And overall, they were enthusiastic about experiencing culture in new and different formats, but kind of still couldn't wait to get back to live cultural events in venues. And I think what became really clear around that time was the tension between what audiences wanted from us and then what was economically viable for most cultural organisations to be able to do at the time, and a kind of lack of understanding from audiences about why that was. So a lot of the comments were like, come on, just open, we're ready, we want to come back, and couldn't kind of get their head around this idea that it was going to, it wouldn't just make money as soon as any audiences came in, and that's why so many organisations have had to stay closed. And to be honest, I'm not sure how much this kind of situation has improved over the last month. So looking at the comments in lots of the surveys that we're doing now, there's still that kind of come on, just get on with it kind of thing. So I think remembering the kind of disconnect between what audiences understand about the financial models going on in organizations is really important, and that communication is key. So kind of explaining the situation, winning their support, and showing the thought process that goes into the decision making. There were also a lot of comments on emerging around the same theme, where they wanted to see us being bold and brave. which I thought was really interesting, this idea that audiences were kind of looking to arts organizations to inspire and lead the way, which is what they're kind of used to seeing. They're used to seeing us responding to current events through art and taking leadership in that way, and they wanted to see that from us in this situation as well. I thought I'd quickly then let you know about what we're doing now. So we've recently launched the next phase of our ongoing research, which is called the Culture Restart Toolkit. We're working in partnership with Baker Richards and One Further on this. So we've kind of collaborated in order to extend the reach of these and to get a little bit more support on the kind of insight and stuff. So we're going to be able to do even more of those kinds of things. So we've developed 2 sets of tools, and they're designed for cultural organizations at all stages of reopening. The first one is the audience tracker. And that is a very similar model to our After the Interval and Act 2 surveys, but what we are suggesting venues do is they send a baseline survey and then they send subsequent surveys in following months. So you basically recruit a small panel of people and get them to check in regularly over time. So we're going to be tracking those kind of key metrics and understanding their sentiment as it changes. Then the experience surveys are pre and post show temperature checkers. So the pre-show is really, really quick. It basically just asks how excited and how nervous are you about coming back to a venue, and is it your first time? And then the post-show one kind of offers them an opportunity to give feedback and then also say whether it kind of lived up to their expectations and whether they managed to relax and forget about the kind of safety concerns and all of those kind of things. And we're seeing some really fascinating results come in. Again, it's totally free for organizations to take part if they would like to. And yeah, just a kind of quick one on the benefit of this kind of research. So I think I've kind of talked about it as I go, but obviously if you're taking part in this kind of thing, you're getting access to your own data, but also contributing to this wider pot. We're able to understand audiences and the different groups and communicate with them in better ways that are more informed, and tailor communications to different groups. It helps to be able to understand your area and art form. So some of our dashboards you can filter by area of the country or by different types of art forms, so we can see how audiences are behaving in those different ways. And basically it's really helped us to just join up across the sector to lobby for the support that we need in a way that's based in audience reality, not just kind of financial concerns. So you've kind of got those 2 things. You're saying this is what we really need and it's what the audiences want. So it's a sort of 2-pronged attack. And yeah, thanks very much. I will send all of those links over to share with you so you kind of have all of those bits, and very happy to take any questions.
Flo, thank you so much. That
Yeah,
was
no
great.
worries.
A good whiz through.